You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is October 5th, 2025, and this is episode 327 of Lighthearted. My co-host is Michelle Jewel Shaw, mom, teacher, rock and roll drummer, and chairperson of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
In a few minutes, we'll listen to an interview with a woman who's written a wonderful new book about her mother, who was a lighthouse keeper's daughter. We are recording this in September, and the school year started up for you a couple of weeks ago. So how's it going so far, Michelle?
It's going pretty well so far. Busy. It's always, kind of hectic at the start of the year, but I have high hopes that this is going to be a good year.
Yeah, well, that's a good attitude, of course. And regular listeners might remember that you're a special ed teacher in Middle school. And just, I've said thank you before, but I'm just going to say it again. Thanks for doing that, because it's such important work.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Well, that's good. If you're going to do it, I think you need to love it.
Absolutely.
So good luck with this school year. Also, something that you and I are both dealing with here. I want to mention again our local fundraising effort here on the New Hampshire seacoast to rebuild the footbridge at Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse that was washed out in a storm a couple of years ago. We just had a successful fundraising cruise last Sunday, and we have a couple of events up our sleeves in the coming months.
People can also make a donation through our website at portsmouthharborlighthouse.org, or you can go through our GoFundMe page. They can also buy a T-shirt on our website to support our project, and the T-shirts are great.
They are. They're very cool, and we should mention the Lighthouse Credit Union that actually helped us with design the T-shirt and donated our first 50, and are a partner in the fundraising effort. They've been great. I was thinking about it. I think sometimes with fundraising efforts, people tend to think they can't donate a lot, so they don't donate anything. But, even if people donate $5, $10, whatever it might be, it all helps. It adds up.
Absolutely. It adds up pretty quickly, and any little bit helps, like you said, Jeremy. And, we're truly grateful to all of the people that have donated and, to the future people who continue to support us. So
Absolutely.
We really, truly appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's get into today's interview. Please help me out, Michelle.
Sure, Jeremy. Therese Woelfel, who lives in Green Bay, Wisconsin, has held leadership roles in Fortune 500 companies, entrepreneurial endeavors, and nonprofit organizations. Her new book, Our Guiding Light, is her first nonfiction book. Therese's grandfather, Charles A. Linzmeyer, was a lighthouse service keeper at several stations on the Great Lakes from 1920 to 1953. The book tells the story of Linzmeyer's daughter, Vivian, who was Therese's mother.
Here's an excerpt from the book description. Quote, "A lighthouse doesn't calm the storm. It simply reminds you where the shore is and says, you are being cared for and watched over." From her parents and the other lighthouse keepers they knew, Vivian learned some of the most valuable lessons of her life, honesty and service to others. As she navigated her life living through the Great Depression and World War II, standing up to social injustice and raising 8 children, she surrendered to the divine and allowed herself to be watched over. In turn, she was able to be a steady beacon of light and hope for those who encountered life's storms. Unquote.
The book tells the story of how Vivian survived trauma as a child and rose above her circumstances. It's an inspirational story that also happens to include some history of lighthouses on the Great Lakes.
Yep, so let's listen to my conversation with Therese Langer Woelfel now. I'm speaking today with Therese Langer Woelfel, who is the author of a really beautiful new book. The book is called Our Guiding Light. It's the story of Therese's mother, Vivian Ann Linzmeyer Langer, who was the daughter of a lighthouse keeper, circa 1920 to 1953 on the Great Lakes. Thank you so much for doing this, Therese.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy.
So let me ask you a real basic question starting out here. What prompted you to write the book?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. The whole time I was growing up, I'm the youngest of 8 of Vivian's children. And as I was growing up, I used to tease her that a book should be written about the lighthouse keeper's daughter that married the airline pilot. It was always a joke. And she was just a kind, generous, thoughtful, selfless person. a person of service to others. And so I always loved her. Everyone loved her. But it was the day of her funeral in 2013 when my cousin leaned into the microphone to say a few words and basically just said, let's give Vivian a standing ovation for a life well lived. And the entire church jumped to their feet in a way that just rocked the core of my world. I couldn't even understand, I guess, at that moment, in my moment of grief, how she could have impacted people from all over the country came for this quiet, selfless, introverted woman. And, it changed the way I looked at things. And for about 4 years, I told my husband, I'm going to write an article called Standing Ovation, and it's going to challenge people to live their life in a way that causes others to jump to their feet. But in all, full disclosure here, I don't claim to be that person. I was raised by that person. So it took, 4 years of me talking about it and doing nothing until I realized that I don't really understand the premise of why everyone jumped to their feet. Like, I know what she did for me, but how did she make that impact across the country? So 4 years to the exact day, not knowing at the time, my husband and I were in Italy visiting our daughter who was studying in Florence. And I threw a coin into the Trevi Fountain. And just basically, I was in a crux in my career at that time. And I said, what is the life plan for me? I just kind of threw a coin. And as we were walking away from the fountain, my husband said, let's follow everyone. They're walking into this building. So a historic building. We followed them in, and it ended up to be a church right across from the Trevi Fountain. And again, I had one of these life-changing moments where everything dimmed in the church. It changed for me, not for anyone else. My husband said the lights did not dim, but for me, they did. And I saw the Blessed Mother glowing. As crazy as this story sounds, I walked to her. I could feel my mother's presence, who had been gone for 4 years. And I basically asked, what is my life plan? And I heard the words, write the book. And it was from, I felt very calm and serene, but yet in awe of this message. So I knew that this article called Standing Ovation was going to become a book. How, I didn't know, but I did ask how this book would be written, and she said she will help you. And I had a knowing that she was my mother, Vivian, the lighthouse keeper's daughter. A few days later, we were in Florence, and I had the same experience in the Duomo, in the church in Florence, where, again, I went into the Blessed Mother and I lit a votive candle, and grateful for my mother, who was just an incredible person. And I asked, what is my life purpose? And I heard again the words, write the book. And when I questioned, how will this book be written? She said, or my mother's voice came from heaven, and she said, I will help you. And I knew right then and there that this was a journey where I was just going to be the vessel for this book. And it was 8 years to go through this process, but it's been the most joyful and most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. But truly trying to honor the lives of my mother. And now I know in a greater way, the lighthouse keeping way of life that many of us are excited about is really, truly one of the layers, the main layer of foundation for how she lived her life in that way.
Well, congratulations on following it through and writing a really, really beautiful book. And you start the book with the standing ovation at your mother's funeral, which is, I think, a very captivating way to pull us in. It certainly did for me. And you refer to the kind of signs or messages you got, and that's a common theme in the book that comes back later. Let me ask you: did you feel your mother's presence throughout the writing of the book?
Oh, definitely. And, most of it was just, the foundation for coming up with the history, because, being the youngest of 8, I probably had the least knowledge, right? Being just so much younger during all of those years. But she left behind, she had written articles locally and nationally. She was published in the Lighthouse Digest in February of '96. That was a great article. And she had journals, family letters, and correspondence to other families all over the Great Lakes, kind of sharing their experiences and trying to connect dots. These are people who have lost, loved ones, who are saying, were you there? What was that like? And just so many letters that were saved. But one specific time, I was opening my closet door, and I was just like, where is that piece? Where is that piece of paper? And as I opened the closet door, a piece of paper came out on the floor right by my feet, and I picked it up, and it was exactly what I was looking for. So I hope that's not scary to people. To me, it was kind of like, yay, here I have it. And she was with me. I could feel her presence as I was writing the book, and also my grandfather's as well.
Yeah. Well, I certainly don't discount those signs and messages. And again, we'll get back to that theme in a little bit. But let's talk about your grandfather a bit. Well, of course, we'll get back to your mother. But you didn't actually know your mother's father, your grandfather. Is that right?
No, I didn't. He passed in January of 1962, and I was born in March of 1962. So I never met him. But boy, I sure feel like I know him now.
Yeah. And I think anybody who reads the book will feel that way too. So your grandfather was born in 1892, became a lighthouse keeper in 1920, if I have it right. And early in his career, he went from North Manitou Island to Cana Island. Then he actually quit the lighthouse service kind of briefly in 1922. Why did that happen? Why did he resign? And why did he become a keeper again after that?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. And my dad lived 9 years longer than my mom. So he was just a wealth of information and connecting dots. And he shared the story with me that when Grandpa was at, it's Cana Island, or I think if you're in the service at that time, people call it Caney Island as well. But he was working with a head keeper who, when I asked my dad, why did Grandpa quit the service? He said it was kind of like the kind of heavy-handed leadership of the head keeper. And he said something about the tyrant type nature and whatnot. And my grandpa was a man of integrity. He was similar to my mom. He was quiet, steady in a storm, just a really ethical person. And I think it was just, beyond what he felt was reasonable. So he was only there, I think, about 7 or 8 months before he quit the service. And he and his wife, Esther, then, packed up their things and took off. And then the U.S. Lighthouse Service tracked them down. And I'm not sure how that happened exactly, but they tracked him down and they asked him to serve at Calumet. I think there was an understanding, according to my dad, that this is not the first assistant keeper he had turned over. There was quite a cycle of this happening. And so then he went to serve in Indiana area.
So your mother was born in 1926?
Yes.
Where was your family living when your mother was born?
They were in Milwaukee at the time. My grandfather was assigned in 1925, moved to Milwaukee, he and his wife Esther. And my mother was born in 1926. And by this time, they had lost 2 stillborn baby boys while they were on North Manitou. And so obviously they were excited for this pregnancy. My grandfather was actually working in the breakwater. And there's a picture in the book that shows, this was in April, so it wasn't during this time, but where during the breakwater, when the waves would crash over in the winter, it would freeze the, this huge structure completely shut. And they'd have to go out with axes, the lighthouse keepers, and they'd have to chop the door open to get the keepers out to switch every 48 hours for their shifts. He happened to be at that breakwater in April, though, and it was a torrential rainstorm, and he rowed ashore in a little rowboat to get to the hospital. And when he arrived, they said, well, it's all over. And he just assumed that meant over, meaning he lost his wife and his daughter. But no, healthy wife, healthy daughter, and so grateful for that.
Well, just to move forward to something kind of a sad, very sad subject. You just mentioned Esther a couple of times, his first wife. She actually she died tragically.
She did.
Yeah. Can you tell me what happened?
Sure. So after leaving Milwaukee in 1934, Grandpa was transferred to Sheboygan. And Grandma at that time had a heart condition as well as an enlarged thyroid. And so she was having trouble breathing. And according to, I hired someone at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. to resurrect all of the old keeper logs. And in there, it shows that they had taken a 15-day leave of absence shortly before that. And my dad had shared with me that was to seek medical care for Esther to arrange for a surgery. So she was 3 weeks prior to a goiter surgery she was going to have. And she went for a walk late at night by herself. And when she didn't come back, my grandpa went looking for her, and it was a windy night, and a mast from a ship swung and hit her and knocked her into the water, and she drowned. And so at age 9, my mother, and age 7, her brother Chuck, they lost their mother who had drowned at the Sheboygan Harbor Station.
How did life change for your mother at that point?
Well, interestingly, and this is information that was in her diary, and I can read it because it's really fascinating. She said, so this is in Vivian's diary. While it wouldn't have been uncommon during this time for a father to send his children to live with relatives, my father chose to keep our family together. I admired him for this and thought he was the kindest person I had ever known. Despite our intense sadness, our father guided us through this tragedy. He spent many evenings teaching us about the stars and constellations. As a sailor, he understood the importance of the North Star to guide the way. As our father, he knew the heavens would temporarily put our sadness on hold as our minds and souls filled with wonder. Each night, the lighthouse keepers and their families gathered together in their quarters. The men would keep us spellbound with stories of their sailing and lighthouse days. Mm-hmm. So I think, growing up, my mother didn't focus on the loss of her mother. It obviously impacted her deeply. She focused on the love and respect she had for her father in keeping the family together. And it wouldn't have been uncommon during that time for families to, be split up. But he kept them together. It was important.
Your mother was a beautiful writer.
Oh, she was.
It really was. Really. There's a spiritual thread through a lot of what she wrote and what you've written, certainly. Mm-hmm. Your grandfather had a dream of premonition. Mm-hmm. I really find that fascinating. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of fascinating to me when shortly after her mother passed, my mother woke up in the morning and her dad was supposed to be helping with some work at a barn nearby, just down the road. And when my mother woke up, her dad was in the kitchen making breakfast. And so she asked him, why are you here? I thought you were going to be gone. And he said, oh, no, the barn burnt down last night. And when she asked how he knew, he said, well, I had a very vivid dream and I just know. And when I asked my mother about that, and I said, well, what do you think about that? And she said, very interestingly, she said, just because we put a clock on the wall or we hang a calendar, that is how we on earth in this life manage our linear life. We need those instruments to stay on time and to keep our commitments and whatnot. But truly, she and her father both believe that in heaven and in other dimensions. My mother really was into astronomy. So she believed in, time warps and all kinds of interesting things. And think of a sailor, all of the things my grandfather probably witnessed that were just, so more than one dimension. So basically what he said is there's just so many mysteries in the universe and life, and we don't understand them all. But I do believe that that you can have a dream and know, whether you believe it's angelic or whether you believe it's because there's more dimensions in the world than we can fathom. Either concept is fascinating to me. I happen to think it's more angelic and more, heaven sent. I mean, I've certainly have experienced that in writing this book, that there's a lot of things we don't understand, and I've learned not to question them, just to go with it.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's in a sense both, angelic and kind of a function of how time is an artificial thing, as your mother said. So back to your grandfather's career, he was transferred to Raleigh Point in Wisconsin, right, 1941, and the family ended up there. He was keeper until I think he was an assistant first, and then the principal keeper until 1953. So 12 years, which is quite a bit of time. So what was life like for the family at Raleigh Point?
Well, first of all, he was supposed to be transferred to Sturgeon Bay, but right before the transfer took place, another assistant keeper at Raleigh Point Lighthouse, just north of Two Rivers, Wisconsin, he climbed the tower, and as he came back down, he had a heart attack and he passed. So it was a quick decision that moved the family to the Raleigh Point Lighthouse, and there, I think they settled into a routine. It's very isolated, 7 miles out into the point. There were no other, there was actually one other child who was in the lighthouse with another family, but 3 children, a long trip to school, very isolated. But I think there was just kind of a peacefulness that took place in that time. We live in such a chaotic world, and I think for them it was very simple. It was nature-based. It was story-based. A lot of sailing stories took place in the evenings, and a lot of family time that I think sometimes were a little bit too rushed to appreciate. But during that time, there was also a traumatic thing that happened in that my grandfather, so he remarried Dula and became my mother and my Uncle Chuck's stepmother. And, she came from a very strict German background and was kind of left at home after her brothers left to raise her parents, and just a different upbringing. But at age 15 and age 13, after living together as a family for not quite a year, she asked both my mother and my Uncle Chuck to move out of the house. So they were relocated into separate families, separate homes in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, and basically had to fend for themselves. They had to work to make money for their room and board. And I'm going to say it was pretty traumatic. Now, my mother never talked about this. This was, she was generous and kind and just appreciated everything in life and let it go. My father, on the other hand, had a hard time letting that go. It's a pretty big deal, when you remove children from a house that's not necessary. So, but one thing I've learned about my mother is, and she taught us through this whole process of writing this book, is that not only did she have the grace of a lighthouse keeper's way of life and service and duty to others, but she had her eyes on divine light. So she just trusted in a higher power to guide her. And because of that, she could let all of that go and just be an extremely generous and kind person who helped guide others who were in need. It's hard to grasp how that's possible. A simple person like me, I think, wow, that's a pretty generous person. And truly, probably the foundation of why people jumped to their feet for her was she was just selfless and generous.
It's interesting. You just used the words generous and kind a couple of times there. And next question I was going to ask you is, I love, there's a number of great quotes from your mother in the book, but she said, quote, "We have many choices in life. It's important to be generous and kind," unquote. Mm-hmm. And obviously your mother lived by those words.
Every minute of every day. I think it's a choice she had to make every minute of every day. And I think of how many days or how many times during a day where I might not stop and make that decision. And in the book, she left behind not only the example of how she lived her life, but she actually left behind a tool that we all can use called grace in really reminding ourselves 24 hours a day to, give up control and truly be generous and kind.
To switch back to lighthouses, when you were growing up, did your mother talk much? Did she tell you about that stuff? Did she tell you stories about growing up at the lighthouses?
Oh, definitely. And, she really liked to tell stories about her father. She was proud of him. And, some of the, stories she told were, I think one of the first stories I remember hearing was when he was a sailor before he was a lighthouse keeper in the Great Storm of 1913. He was on a tugboat pulling a barge of lumber from Detroit, Michigan to Buffalo. And this is when the two major storm fronts collided and created 35-foot waves, blinding snow squalls and whatnot. And he and his crew actually for 3+ days crossed Lake Erie during one of the greatest storms. And actually when they reached Buffalo, off in the distance, there was the Buffalo Lightship that they saw, and that's how they found the harbor. Without it, they couldn't see anything. But they followed that lightship to get into the harbor, and as they arrived in the harbor, the U.S. Lightship Buffalo was actually flipped upside down, inverted. It had broken away from its anchorage, and all 6 crewmen went down with this boat. So the reason Mom told those stories, and there were many stories like this, were because she wanted to understand that how Grandpa understood the importance of the the lighthouses, the foghorns, the all of the navigational aids that helped. He was serious about it because he understood how dangerous it was, and without those aids, that people would be lost in at sea. She also told a story of one time she witnessed her father. He was over 100 feet in the air, and he had tied himself by a rope to the outside of a lighthouse, and he was out there in the worst storm scraping ice off of the glass, hanging by a small rope. But he, first of all, refused to let anyone else do it because that's just how he was wired. And then second of all, he knew that those ships that were out there in that weather needed his light to guide their way. And so I think that's why she said he was such a dedicated keeper, was because he understood the importance.
Yeah. Well, what a great example of devotion of keepers. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing, but not unique, certainly.
No.
Lighthouses. Yeah. As you were talking about the storm, I think it blows the minds of a lot of us live on the coast. I'm on the East Coast, and to think 35-foot waves on the Great Lakes, coastal people, I think, don't appreciate the immensity of the Great Lakes.
Yeah. And there were, hundreds of ships were lost, and they said afterwards there were many, many, sailors that were washed up ashore wearing the name of the boat, the ship in which they were sailing when this happened. So it was tragic.
How did your mom meet your dad?
Well, my dad was from Two Rivers and grew up there, and his dad owned the Langer Brother Garage, which was a service station. And, he was pumping gas, and my mother was sitting in the back seat of, her father's car as they were filling up, and they, kind of made eye contact. And then they were in the same class at Washington High School in Two Rivers. So they met that way. And then my dad, whenever he could borrow a service station truck, he would come out on the weekends and visit her at the lighthouse. And even though she lived in town during the week, on the weekends, that was their family time, and they would spend that time together. And they had a lot of really interesting stories. I always thought it was funny that my dad said the first time he ever held her hand was through her mitten, because they were going to a movie theater together, and they went to see, I think, an Abbott and Costello movie. And just how sweet and innocent those times were. And
you mentioned it earlier, but your father was a pilot, became an airline pilot.
Yeah.
His career.
I think my mom, she used to tease us because a lot of people said, "Oh, did you marry him for his uniform?" And she said, "Well, the uniform he wore when I knew him went through the last load of our Wringer washing machine because he was full of grease, because he was basically an airplane mechanic." But since the age of 6, I have a picture on my desk with him wearing a little hat that says aviator on it. And he knew he was going to be an airline pilot. He was basically born into this earth for that reason, I believe. But he actually, he was very driven. And we have a joke in our family that we say our mother was so kind and generous, and our dad was so driven. Thank God she softened the gene pool, because we're all very motivated people, like my father. He, though, was one of the first 3 pilots to fly a jet in our country and to bring jets into the airline service. So he had a very interesting career. He was taught to fly from those who flew in open male cockpit planes, and those who served in the service. So, he was just interesting to see the kind of the revelation of the industry and the role that men like him played in that.
Could you say just a little bit about your parents' involvement in World War II?
Yeah, sure. So my dad flew. He was an airline. I'm sorry. He was a mechanic in World War II, but he and his crew flew all over. I think it was like 16 countries. It was crazy that what he did as a young man, came from Two Rivers, Wisconsin, and that's all he knew. And he saw the world very quickly. So that he flew, kind of lied about his age to get into the service. And towards the end, his job was they'd see 2 or 3 airplanes they would that were in a bad state, and they would repair them and create 1 or 2 good airplanes and fly them out. So he was all over the world flying airplanes from other countries back to the United States. During that time, my mother was in Two Rivers, and she worked for Hamilton Manufacturing Company, and she was at that time identified as having the highest IQ in her school, and they said as well as probably in the whole community. And the FBI got word of that, and they wanted her to come work for them. And a quote from my father is, he said, I said, well, Dad, what did you say? And he said, I'm not going to have some general chasing her around his desk. So it was kind of a joke. I think at that time, a lot of women stepped up and did roles that they didn't normally do, right, to fill the gap, the workforce gap. And that was definitely the case with a lot of people that my parents knew. My mother had one really amazing experience, and that is when she was at the lighthouse, and there was actually a mock landing practice for Normandy that was taking place. And it was all top secret. There were no civilians in the area except for my mother, who was at the lighthouse by herself. She was holding a dish towel in her hand, standing out on the back porch. She witnessed all of these large Navy ships coming, men boarding, coming off, just like you'd see if you watched a video of what happened at Normandy. And they crawled up the beach all the way to her. Not a word was said. They turned around and they did the exact opposite. There were military people on shore watching and kind of, testing and kind of grading, the test mock landing. But my mother had no idea what that was. And when her father came home later that day, she shared her experience, and he said, whatever you witnessed, it's really a priority to keep that to yourself and keep it private, because you need to protect the war efforts. And 2 years later, she saw the exact same thing take place in Normandy.
That is incredible. What a thing to witness.
Mm-hmm.
Your father once said that living with your mother was like living with Mother Teresa.
Well, she always did the right thing. There was no question. So, and she didn't judge others who made decisions, but for her, when she was making a decision, or our family it was, you were never better than anybody else. Everyone is equal, and our job is to move others forward, right? Even at our expense. So I teased my dad, though, and I said, well, how hard can that be, living with Mother Teresa, who always wants to do the same thing, unless sometimes you don't want to do the right thing? And we all laughed about that, because she just had a barometer on her about just doing the right thing. And I think it came truly from the Lighthouse service and the duty and service to others.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Here's another, it's not exactly a premonition or a sign or anything like that, a little different. I guess it falls under the category of things happen for a reason. But jumping ahead to the 1970s here, can you tell me the story of the woman your mom spoke to at the Vatican in 1975?
Isn't that crazy? What a crazy story. Yeah, so my parents were traveling through Italy, and they decided to experience a Mass at the Vatican from the Pope. And they were running a little bit behind. And so when they got on the bus to go there, they couldn't sit by each other. So my mother sat in the first aisle seat that was available. And she ended up sitting by this lady who was very nervous, wringing her hands, and she was sweating. And my mother just said she didn't know what it was, but she knew her job was to calm her down. So my mother had very calm presence about her. And she just calmed her down and had conversation, and she could see her just relax. And my mother never really thought much about it after that. They finished their vacation, they went home, but it was in January the following year when the Time magazine hit her hands, and she saw the picture of Sarah Jane Moore on the cover after she had just attempted to assassinate Gerald Ford. And my mother said, that is the lady that I sat next to on the bus. That is Sarah Jane Moore. So my mother truly believed that she was doing being a vessel for God's work in stopping Sarah Jane Moore for trying to hurt the Pope. I mean, that's what she truly believed. And we were all floored. My mother was not a person who made up stories. I mean, she was the most quiet person ever. So when she told a story, it was truth.
You just said to stop her from hurting the Pope. Did you mean Gerald Ford, or was she?
The real Pope, the actual Pope at the Vatican.
So she not only attempted to assassinate Gerald Ford. You think she at that moment she was thinking about assassinating the Pope?
That is what my mother truly believed when she saw the magazine. When she knew, she just said in her heart and soul, and also just witnessing with the transformation that took place, she said yes, she believed that she was on a mission to hurt the Pope.
Wow. So let's jump ahead to more recent history. Please tell me about your mother's illness, and part two of that is, what was it, and what was believed to have caused it?
Yeah. So she was diagnosed initially with Parkinson's disease. She began falling, difficulty speaking. She couldn't swallow, just losing the control of her limbs, arms, legs, hands, things like that. Basically becoming trapped in this body. And one meeting with a neurologist, they did some additional tests and they said, no, you don't have Parkinson's disease. You have progressive supranuclear palsy. And to me, it's like Parkinson's disease only on steroids. It's much worse. It happens faster. It's just a very unforgiving disease. So when my mother, although she could talk a little bit initially, but then she lost her ability. But during that time, she asked the neurologist what was the cause of it, because she was only concerned for others. And she wanted to know if this was genetic, something that should be tested throughout the family or something to that effect. And the neurologist said, no, this is environmental. It is. And at that point, I remembered my mother, as we were growing up, talking about the leaded paint that took place at the lighthouses. I mean, they were constantly, when you read the book, you'll see constantly painting everything. It was all leaded paint. And that was to really protect everything from the elements. That's leaded paint was the paint of choice. But when I visited the North Point Lighthouse in Milwaukee, there was an excavator there, and I asked him what he was doing, and he said he was looking at the lead paint levels in the soil, and he was saying that they put the gardens extremely close to the towers and to the homes to make it easy for the families. But what they've discovered is the rain washing along the buildings, as well as paint chipping, put leaded paint, unsafe levels in their food. In addition, there was pesticides sprayed by the government every year. I mean, that was to help everyone with all of the pests. There was asbestos, that batting that was removed many times when we did lighthouse tours. And then the mercury that was not only vapors, but actually touched many times by the keeper. And when you look at how everyone passed in my mother's family, there's just a section where I put that in there because I wonder how many other lighthouse families may have experienced, cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, all of these things. And many of them, I believe, are attributed to the, like many of us have environmental exposure to environmental things, but it was a pretty clean track of things that they were exposed to.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't think anybody that I know of has ever done a study of that type of thing among lighthouse families. But yeah, the lead paint contamination is still being dealt with. I mean, the Coast Guard has been gradually turning over a lot of these properties to nonprofits and communities and so forth. In a lot of cases, they're having to do lead paint remediation of the soil before they're turned over. And as far as the mercury goes, yeah, a lot of the lenses rotated on a bed of mercury. And I've heard stories about lighthouse kids playing with the mercury, taking some of it out and playing with it, which, as a kid, I think there was more than one time when a thermometer broke, or we deliberately broke a thermometer or something in my house, and we played with the mercury, which is weird stuff. Yeah. Yeah. So, but not in great quantities, at least, I guess. But yeah, so it's a sad subject, but very interesting, and be interesting if somebody took up a study of that for sure. So I don't want to give everything away. I don't want to have too many spoilers here. I want people to read the book, of course. As we said, your mother was a very spiritual person. There's a lot of spiritual elements to her story. And something happened just after she died. You were with your family, you said, at a Mexican restaurant discussing, I think, the funeral plans, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And something very interesting happened. What happened?
Yeah. So my dad and two sisters and I were making arrangements, and we split up into two groups to take care of a few things. And we got together they love Mexican food. We went to a little Mexican restaurant, and I had my phone sitting on the table right next to me, face up. And as we were talking, my phone lit. And as I looked over, the word gracias appeared, which is thank you in Spanish. And I wasn't typing. There was no one talking near me. And so I picked up my phone and I turned it towards my dad and my two sisters. And we all knew that it was a thank you from Vivian for helping her transition to heaven. And it happened that time and another time on my husband's phone, where we were all, my dad and my husband and I were gathered together, and we were going through some of her albums and journals. And we were talking about just her unselfish, or her, I guess, her selfless nature with her grandchildren and her unconditional love for them. And his phone, my husband's phone, lit up, and he picked it up and turned it toward us, and it said, "Miss them all." So those were the instances where I knew, even though my mother isn't here with us on earth, she's with us. And she continually sends us messages. Those were pretty blatant, forward messages, but we get signs and messages from her in the form of bluebirds and all kinds of things, eagles. And when it happens, there is no doubt in anyone's mind, because you feel it to your core, that it's a sign from heaven.
I don't know if you know, it's a fairly well-documented phenomenon that people have gotten so-called phone calls from the dead. Mm-hmm. Somebody will get a phone call and have a conversation with somebody, then find out they died the day before. Yeah. That is not all that uncommon. Somebody I know wrote a book called Phone Calls from the Dead.
Oh, really?
Now with modern technology, I guess we're getting texts instead of phone calls.
Yeah, right.
That's fascinating. So you just mentioned bluebirds. Tell me about your mom and bluebirds.
Yeah, a couple just interesting things. The last words I said to her as she passed were, I said, "Send us bluebirds," because she and my father had monitored over 150 bluebird boxes for the National Forest Service in northern Wisconsin. And my dad always jokingly said, "Your mother has held more baby bluebirds in her hands than most people have ever seen." So it was a big thing for them. So when she was passing, and I asked her if she was ready to go to heaven, and we had taught her hand signals of a fist closed for no and a point for yes, because she couldn't speak. And she said yes with one finger. And then when I said, "Are you ready to meet Jesus?" she did a double finger, meaning like that had never happened before. She was ready to go. So when I said, "Send us bluebirds," we began watching for bluebirds everywhere. And in one particular case, my dad went to her gravesite every day and grieved every day for months and months. And one day I told him I'd meet him there. And as I was walking up, I leaned down to the pot of flowers that he had put there. And there was a bluebird stake, and it was facing towards me. And it's a bluebird stake that my granddaughter had picked out for Grandma after she passed. And it was facing towards me. And I said, "Oh, we should be watching for bluebirds." And I kind of looked around. I sat down next to him, and he said, "Look, Therese," and the bluebird stake had turned completely around and was facing both of us. And my dad knew that it was a sign from heaven that she had done it, because I didn't touch it. It wasn't windy, and it happened. And he also said that he knew the reason that it happened at that time was because I was with him. And if it had happened when he was there alone, it'd be easy to dismiss it as, no, it didn't happen. But I saw the bluebird facing the other way, and I saw it when it was turned. And I believe that it was a sign from heaven that, she's showing us her bluebirds.
Yeah. When I think of bluebirds, they're kind of something ethereal and magical about them. The blue is so intense. They're such incredibly beautiful birds. Mm-hmm. And I'm always thrilled when we don't see them around here very often. When I do, I'm thrilled about it. So your mother said many simple but very wise things. And one quote in the book is, quote, "A small ripple affects the ocean," unquote. So what did that mean?
Well, it kind of rocked me to the core when I saw that, because I thought, isn't that just like her, a simple statement and so profound? And basically, I think the lesson was what I witnessed her doing her entire life is even the smallest act of kindness can impact the world, as she touched families and provided housing, clothing, so many things that she did, and all of the a lot of the social activist work that she found herself doing in the 1960s, and the picketing and all these things that you'll find in the book. And I just realized that, each small thing, we all have the opportunity. Small acts of kindness can reverberate around the world and make huge impact. And so I think in a way it's frightening, because you think, there is a responsibility for each of us. And every day we should be looking for kind things to do, small and large. And every act creates a ripple that goes on forever. And I still see the ripple of impact from her life through her grandchildren to this day. How they're formed, how they think, the service they do, that came from her. And that was just a small example that she gave our family that will go on for generations to come. And she also found families who didn't have that type of stability and that type of backing, and she became that person for them and taught their family, and that is still going through their families for generations.
Thinking about the ripples, that's an analogy I've used in my life. Ripples, that's a powerful idea, and I imagine all these ripples kind of converging and maybe creating a wave of kindness eventually. So yeah, it adds up. So let me just talk a little bit more about you before we wind things up here. You've had a very distinguished career in the business world and in the nonprofit world. And I was looking at your LinkedIn page, and I urge people to do that if they want to read your credits, which are very impressive. Can you tell me about the Greater Green Bay Community Foundation that you've been involved with?
Yeah, so that is the last 5 years of my career before I retired. And again, it was one of those divine moments where I was, after I had thrown the coin in the Trevi Fountain, and I asked for, I told you I was in a crux in my career. I had helped a nonprofit radio station sustain its mission, and I knew I had to take my salary off the top. I was meeting with someone in town. She was the first female vice president for the Green Bay Packers, Betsy Mitchell. And I was talking with her, and I told her what I was looking for. I said, I think at this point in my life, it's really important that I look to emulate some of the things I've learned from my mother. Service to others, lifting others. How can I use the skills and the things that I've acquired during my career, and the even the connections and all of that? How can I use that to help lift our community? And she leaned over and said, Dennis Bueller is looking for you. And he's the president of the Greater Green Bay Community Foundation. And I found myself I was quickly hired, which was incredible. But I found myself in a position where I could really make an impact in our community, and I could emulate the things that I learned from the lighthouse keeping way of life, as well as from my mother, in service to others, and could support an organization that really is a beacon of light for others in our community. So they basically, what the Community Foundation does is it gives money through donors to nonprofit organizations who are on the front lines, really making a difference in our community. So I could feel my mother's presence every day, and I could feel her urging me to start having conversations a little bit more about faith and getting deeper than just transactional. And so as those conversations took place, I realized that many people want to create a small ripple that goes on forever.
That's beautiful. You are a lighthouse. You're a lighthouse in the community. Your mother was, and you are as well.
Thank you.
With the work you've done and the book as well. There's so much more we could talk about, including the very moving vision you had. Well, you've talked about some of those things, but you've had these visions concerning your mother that are described in the book. I want our listeners to read the book and get the whole story. I have two final questions for you for bonus points, okay? And the first of those two bonus point questions is, and you've kind of answered this, but maybe you could kind of sum it up. How did being a lighthouse keeper's daughter influence the way your mother lived her life?
My mother and her brother and her sister all grew up with integrity and honesty and kindness, duty, accuracy. Those were all things they witnessed from their father. They all lived their lives in service of others in a big way, not a small way, where it was ingrained in them. So I feel like, first of all, she felt it was very important to support all of the lighthouses that remain in the world and in our country, and all of the organizations that are doing good work to support them. She also thought it was really important to honor the families of the lighthouse keepers. So she continually wrote articles and was published because she didn't want all of that family history to be lost. But I think that the foundation of her being a guiding light for others was what she learned as the daughter of a lighthouse keeper in the Great Lakes.
Mm-hmm. Final question for bonus points, okay? What do lighthouses mean to you?
Wow. See, lighthouses to me they're a spiritual beacon for me. They're letting people know that you're never alone. There's always someone watching out for you. And without, if we don't look beyond ourselves and look for help from a guiding light, whether you look at that as a lighthouse, as a mariner, or if you look at it as, divine in this book, I feel like it's the foundation of, why we're on earth and how we all lift each other together is the beam of a lighthouse.
Mm-hmm. Therese, thank you so much. Thank you for everything you do as a lighthouse in the community. Thank you for the book. I think the book is a wonderful new addition to the world of lighthouse literature. And
thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I recommend the book very highly to our listeners. So thank you again. Thanks so much. I hope we can talk again. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
The book, Our Guiding Light, Wisdom from the Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter, is available from Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and other online booksellers.
It was really wonderful to speak with Therese, and I love the book. There's a strong spiritual thread in Vivian's story. I usually kind of stay away from talking about lighthouses in religious terms because I prefer to let people interpret the symbolism of lighthouses however they want to. I think it's kind of a personal thing. But there's no doubt that a guiding light in the darkness has powerful spiritual connotations for people.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that, Jeremy. It's a lighthouse means so many different things to so many different people, but at the end of the day, I think it is the meaning of lighthouses to people is very powerful.
Yes. And, when we say keep a good light at the end of this podcast, to me, that's what we're talking about. To me, it's, again, if you see it in religious terms or not, to keep a good light is to kind of recognize the spark of the divine that's inside every one of us.
Yes. Be sure to check out uslhs.org to learn about all the things the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers, including preservation grants, the online research catalog, and tours. Donations and memberships help support this podcast.
We'll have a Lighthearted Light episode next week, and the week after that, we'll listen to a conversation that's kind of a companion to the one we just heard. The guest will be Don Ledelseta, who has written a new book called Hannah, Lighthouse Girl of Newfoundland, which was inspired by his own mother. Until next time, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
Let it shine everywhere I go. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All in my house, I'm gonna let it shine. All in my house, I'm gonna let it shine. All in my house, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine.